Welcome to another episode of the Weekly Crypto Check-In, recorded on July the 3rd, 2025. I'm your host, Robert Swarthout, and joined by my co-host, Andres Sandate. How's it going, Andres?
Good, Robert. I'm recording today from the Gulf. I'm down in Panama City Beach for a family vacation today, so it's good to connect. And I know it's been a couple of weeks. So
now that it's the Gulf of America, did they fix all the signs down there?
I haven't seen the new signage up. The certainly has not impacted or deterred anybody from coming down here.
They
Seems
don't
like
get
more
lost looking for the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, more people will be here tomorrow, maybe with the 4th of July holiday tomorrow. But I didn't know this, but the pier in Panama City Beach is the largest pier in the state of Florida. And I always think about a pier being able to, you're just going to walk out on it and, fish or hang out. But no, they actually charge you. So we
No.
haven't done it, but yeah, a lot of people on vacation, despite I guess a shaky economy.
Yeah, it's been, probably over 10 years since I've been down that direction. So I'm sure it's changed a lot.
Yeah, the only quick aside is, like I said, I grew up in the Midwest, and I remember MTV would always do spring breaks from these places like Panama and Daytona, and I guess Panama City back in the 90s, like early 2000s, was one of the very first locations for spring break. So if you went to school in the Southeast, apparently it was a pretty popular destination. And there's still a lot of that stuff still here, but definitely is more of a family friendly place than it probably was back then, or at least marketed.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, we'll get rolling here. The first topic is the one big beautiful bill. If anybody's watching any sort of news, they know that this is the big, at least the way that Trump has coined it, the big bill. They're trying to throw a bunch of stuff in to fund border security and all sorts of stuff. It does have some crypto provisions in it, or cleanup in some cases. So a little bit of breakdown here. The first thing is small crypto purchases. They may be tax exempt, or you don't pay tax on them if they're under $300 in gains, up to, I believe you had said, a $5,000 yearly cap on something like that.
Yeah, that's the at least the initial amount that they're outlining in the bill.
Yeah, I think that this is cool because it allows crypto to act a little bit like a currency in this sense. You'll be able to use it for some transactions. So that's the first one. The second one is you don't have to pay tax on staking or mining until you sell the tokens. This is a big win, because up until this point, you were paying tax on the gains. You may call it interest, but it's the mining rewards, the staking rewards. And then if you sold the token later, you'd pay tax yet again. Some people view this as double taxation. You probably can make a pretty good argument about that. And that will be cleaned up in this bill. And the third one was a nice advantage that crypto has had since I've been in crypto. And it appears to be going away. The wash sale rule will start applying. So you have to wait 30 days to claim a loss. And you can't obviously repurchase something until after that. So day 31. So basically aligning it with the way the stocks work.
Yeah.
But that has been a nice advantage that crypto's had, and certainly have taken advantage of that loophole in the past. So crypto is growing up, I guess, is the way to think about this one.
Yeah, I saw the term mainstreamization of crypto. I don't know if that's a made up AI word or something, but I hadn't heard mainstreamization. But it does, I think, speak to the fact that there's now institutional players and large, financial institutions that are trading in crypto on a daily basis, much more in line with, I guess, other asset classes, particularly with the stocks. So yeah, it seems like the big beautiful bill is going to include some of these provisions. I think the House is planning. They did a procedural vote overnight, which was July the 2nd, into July the 3rd. Bill passed 219 to 213. Looks like there might be another, final House vote today, with the intention of the bill passing by July 4th. That was the original deadline. So should be a lot of news over the next 24 hours, leading into the holiday.
Yeah, indeed. The fourth thing that's in there about crypto is if you lend your crypto, it doesn't trigger a tax event. In the past, if you lent your crypto out, that was considered a sale in air quotes, and that is now getting cleaned up. I would imagine this is the way equities work. So probably again further aligning with something like that. And the fifth thing is they tried to ban politicians from being able to shill crypto, but this part failed.
Yeah.
It's funny how that
Not
works.
surprised.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, I would have never thought we were getting anything crypto related in the big beautiful bill, but we appear to be. Some good and some not necessarily bad, but just like cleaning up and kind of growing up of crypto. So good times.
Yeah. Reading a little bit about the bill, and there's obviously been a lot of lobbying. I think I saw an article that $100 million has been spent, in lobbying around crypto, digital
Mhm.
assets in general. Obviously, with the bill, there was probably a lot of push over the last, 3, 4 months by the crypto digital asset lobby to include some provisions in there. The so you know with the partisan nature of this bill, the votes in the Senate and the House have been fairly close, right? I think it was 51-50 in the Senate to get it out of the Senate to advance it to the House. Like I said, 219 to 213 on the procedural vote. Um, you know, w- we'll see what ultimately does end up being included from a crypto perspective.
Right.
I think that this bill, given its size, it wouldn't surprise me if there's some provisions like you talked about, some of those points that are included that otherwise may have taken weeks,
Mhm.
months, or maybe even years to
Right.
be put in place into law. So yeah, given the size of the bill, we're talking trillions of dollars. It may be that crypto benefits in some respects, depending on your point of view, by being able to slip and include some of these provisions in an otherwise just highly, highly partisan, controversial bill just to get it passed.
Yep. Absolutely.
So
Well, kind of staying on the topic of Congress and laws, so the Genius Act is the stablecoin bill.
yeah,
That is you know moving along. It's not ready for Trump's desk, but it's getting closer.
yeah,
But the market structure bill is really for the rest of crypto outside of stablecoins. And the promise was that was going to happen this year. We've heard ranges from later in the year to more, shorter periods of time. Now it looks like so. David Sachs, he's the AI and crypto czar. He
crypto
was
czar.
saying how that thank you. He's thanking Senator Tim Scott and Senator Loomis from Wyoming,
Wyoming.
announcing a clear timeline for the structure. It was for them to introduce and kind of push forward. So the bill would be introduced before the August recess. Markup would be the first week of September and potentially done by the end of September. I
Okay.
would have never bet that we would potentially have this thing at least out of the Senate by the end of September, by the end of Q3. I guess you even have a month there for October. End of Q3 is September. Still blows my mind. Again, we've had so many promises not fulfilled in the past that a little PTSD, I guess, there. But it's cool to see it potentially making some progress.
So you feel like the timeline that they've at least outlined, Senator Scott, Senator Loomis, is favorable for the industry as far as
Mhm.
being able to get clarity we all
Right.
want, but the timeline.
The
Um,
borderline, the timeline almost feels aggressive to me because there's
okay.
going to be more in this bill. The Genius Act is pretty straightforward. I mean, it's stable coins. Like, there's not all this extra minutia that goes along in crypto that is going to have to, in some ways, be dealt with or be pushed off on the regulators and tell them to figure out some rules around it. Um, yeah, it feels aggressive, but again, if it happens, I'll be happy. But yeah, I mean, David followed his tweet up with a reply saying July will be a big month. It'll be with a bill signing for Genius. So they believe that the Genius Act for stablecoins will be done then clarity will get going in the Senate. So
Yeah. And the
um,
market structure bill is obviously much more fundamental to the
mhm.
long-term
Well, the rest of crypto.
industry.
I mean, really, what
Yeah.
crypto is not really
Yeah.
stablecoins. I mean,
Right.
that is, but kind of not. It's really just dollars on a blockchain. But all the fun stuff in crypto, in my opinion, needs this market structure bill. So
Yeah. So when we talk about the need for regulation and the need for structure, it's really this bill. the market
Mhm.
structure bill that the
Right.
industry has long been seeking in terms of clarity. So, well, it looks like it's going to be a busy Q3, at least beginning of Q3, and
Mhm.
lots to follow going into the fall.
Indeed. So our third topic is, and this happens separately. This is not they're doing it
Yeah,
together. Circle and Ripple have both applied for bank charters with the OCC. This would have never happened
yeah,
last year. like,
no
um,
doubt.
there's a chance that the CEOs of these companies would have been strung out in a public forum had they tried to do this. But Circle was the first to do it, and then I think within a day or two, Ripple announced that they had applied to get a national bank charter with from the OCC. In Ripple's case, if they were approved, they would both have a state. They'd have state oversight by the NYDFS, so that's a big deal. And then also, obviously, the OCC if they were
Yeah.
able to get that. This is just the continuing mingling and intertwining of crypto into the traditional finance system. Like, we're going to wake up probably not even 5 years from now, 3 years from now, look back and be like, it's going to be everywhere. And this is one of the reasons that it will have gotten there. So,
Yeah, certainly moves to bolster their standing and credibility.
mhm.
Do you think in Ripple's case, it's more than just their stablecoin aspirations?
I think that's part of it. So, Brad, in the tweet, Brad had said that earlier this week. So they also own Standard Custody is one of their subsidiaries of Ripple. They also applied for a Fed Master account via that. So they're going at it from, I guess I wouldn't say all the angles, but like all the different avenues and trying to build out like, in some sense, you could think of it as, I guess, like a C, what they call them CSIFs, the globally important financial institutions.
Oh, systematically important financial institutions,
Yeah,
SIFI.
SIFIs. Yeah, maybe like a modern version of that.
Mm,
Is at least the I guess the angle that I kind of view what Ripple's trying to do, and Circle also to a slightly lesser extent because their business is very much narrow on stablecoins only. But Ripple is doing custody. They're more institutional focused in a broad suite of products. So.
Well, one other comment I would add, having spent part of my career in banking, not on the compliance and regulatory side, but just because there's been such a crossover of asset management and banking with respect to private credit and non-bank lending, there's heightened regulation has caused the banks to pull back in certain respects from lending businesses. What it's done is it's shrunk the number of U.S. bank charters over the
Mhm.
last 15 years since the GFC. There have been
Yep.
fewer new banks formed as a result, and many people would say as a community banking to middle market super regional bank, like there's a real void in the marketplace for access to, just core things like
Mhm.
lending, et cetera. So Ripple saying we want to go, you know, apply for a charter is
Mhm.
actually to me kind of a bigger deal in a sense because they're inviting regulation. They're
Right.
inviting oversight. They're inviting all the different things that come into play in terms of obviously a regulated bank, whether you're a small community bank with one branch or you're a large bank, depending on where they fall, you know, the Fed obviously you would think is being paying a ton of attention to any new bank that's touching crypto, right? And or doing crypto, and it'd be
Mhm.
really fascinating to read their charter application if that's available to see what services and products they intend to offer. Because you would think then that all these other banks may immediately say, you know, hey, these are areas where we want to get into. So I feel like this is going to
Mhm.
be a pretty heightened review of a bank that may not have the kind of assets that a Bank of America, Wells Fargo, have in terms of customer deposits.
Yet.
But but yeah,
Mhm.
but they're only at the very beginning
Mhm.
of their sort of corporate history. So pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, well, certainly something to watch, and will evolve over time. But
Yeah.
the point that I think that you were making there that I really liked was they're inviting oversight, right? Like
Oh yeah.
people have the perception that crypto doesn't want oversight and all this stuff. We want regulation. We want the oversight. Like that will allow I guess, the true promise, in my opinion, of crypto to be able to go into the financial system and help with efficiencies or help speed up different things.
Yeah, I
To
mean, you know, from a corporate perspective, like an enterprise perspective, like not all crypto digital asset companies are operating on this scale and this level. There's certainly tons of bad actors as we see. However, I think that there are some companies that are trying to stand apart and stand above and be the, be the leaders, if you will,
Mhm.
as the industry continues to mature and evolve and get further and further into our economy and into enterprise and to government. So certainly, this, if they were successful in getting a charter approved, would bode well, I would think, for the prospects of them being able to launch additional products and services, et cetera.
Yep, absolutely. So moving on, our next topic, we don't have tons of detail on this, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless. So the SEC is considering a token ETF approval process that would help streamline probably 90% of these, because I would imagine there's over 100 of these applications waiting
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
SEC at this point.
big backlog.
Yeah. So it sounds like they're going to put, do some rulemaking and have some guardrails and hopefully make this easier for everybody, which would be great. So I'd imagine the second half this year, or maybe even, I don't know, maybe in a month or two, might see an avalanche of these things start coming once they can kind of get everyone's ducks in a row here. So
Kind of on a slightly related topic, but isn't there some tokenized stock
yes.
listings happening at some of the bigger trading platforms?
So Kraken has, I think they're
Yeah,
doing 60 of the maybe the biggest by market cap. I think Coinbase is looking at it. Um, the argument that I've seen against these is it's going to add fracture in like to the liquidity, right? Like you're going to have fractionalized liquidity around all these things versus just a traditional stock. I guess is more liquid because it's in a few places rather than more places. I don't know where I stand on this exactly, but it definitely is coming or has already arrived in some cases. So
yeah. Well, I know Coinbase is seeking the SEC approval to offer tokenized U.S. stocks, and that would be a huge move if that was approved. And Robinhood is
mhm.
launching, I want to say, a couple of hundred tokenized stocks in Europe.
Yep.
We often don't talk a lot about Europe on our market update, with the exception of some of the regulation related headlines. But
Mhm.
it's like some of these platforms are going to the jurisdictions where they can get things in place, and
Right.
then we'll probably use that as a way to then enter the U.S. market.
Mhm.
Even though they're already here, in the case of Robinhood, they're going
Sure.
to go to a jurisdiction where they can start, doing business, launching these services and products, see how they
Mhm.
work
Yep.
out the issues, and then come back to the U.S. Where there's a much bigger market.
100%. It's a I, whether it's the CFTC or the SEC, they've got their hands full. I mean,
Yeah,
there's all crypto. I wouldn't say crypto's attacking them, but like crypto wants so many different things right now, and it's like I can't imagine that there's enough people, either one of these agencies, to kind of field all this interest or demand. So it's interesting times, and
well, and it's also, as we're going to get into here in this next update, maybe in the prior administration, and even just three, probably 6 to 9 months ago, these agencies could probably stall, delay, and buy time to come back to these companies by using the courts and by using
right.
just a series of bureaucratic measures, call it, right? And it just doesn't appear to be the case. Like a lot of the courts now, depending on where these cases are brought or
Mhm.
who are the parties involved, the courts are much more in favor of the administration when it comes to crypto today.
Yes.
In many of the jurisdictions where these cases are going to, I guess, be heard. So the yes, you're right. It's forcing the agencies to have to respond and
Mhm.
not delay without a response or information.
Yep.
So
Yep. So you kind of alluded to a little bit of it. Our next topic, this very possibly might be our last SEC Ripple case update.
Okay.
We were close. I thought it was going to drag on a little bit more. So, and I forget if we even did an update on this, but as part of the SEC getting rid of a lot of the other lawsuits that they had started, but they hadn't necessarily got a verdict on yet. The Coinbase, the Kraken, the Binance, all those months ago, they kind of got rid of a lot of those and kind of settled them or kind of just withdrew them. The Ripple case stood out as a little different because it already had a verdict in it, and they were in the appeals process. So the SEC and Ripple both around that same time that all the other cases were getting cleaned up, said, "Hey, let's step back here." They negotiated a smaller fine for Ripple, and the SEC was willing to drop the injunction and all these things, but they had to go back to the court and get the court to agree to undo what the court thought was right at the time. They went back. The judge said, "This is not enough details. Please come back with more." I'm paraphrasing here. And they came back with more details, and the judge is like, "Nope, too bad." And, I can kind of side with the judge a little bit. Like, you basically wasted, you're saying, we wasted 4.5 years of your life on this. Don't worry about it, though. We didn't really mean it. So Ripple and the SEC have since in the last week said that they're both going to drop their cross appeals. Ripple's already done theirs, so they're waiting on the SEC to vote to do theirs, which I think would happen on a Thursday, so maybe next week, or maybe even today for that matter. Anyways, long story short, Ripple's going to pay the full fine, but everyone gets to move on with their life and just kind of close this chapter. I think maybe there's a sneak update we get to do here in the future, but I'm pretty sure this is the last time we're going to talk about this in the sense that it's actively changing.
Wow. Fascinating. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah. I mean, 4.5 years. That was December the 23rd, I believe, of 2020.
Well, I'll tell you my latest Ripple story. I'm in Panama City, and I know you have theories about this. When everybody owns Bitcoin or everybody's talking about Bitcoin, that's usually a sign that we're later stages of a bubble.
Yeah.
And so I'm out on the fishing charter yesterday.
Okay.
And, when you're out on a fishing charter, you're out for 4 to 8 hours. Well, we chose the 4-hour version.
Yeah.
And so you're not fishing, like reeling in fish the whole time, right? You're driving out, you're fishing, you're trolling. But so you have downtime. And so in the process, the captain's first mate starts talking about crypto.
Okay.
Unprovoked. I mean, just
Okay.
starts talking about Bitcoin. And he's like, I own some Bitcoin, sold it, had to pay some bills or whatever.
Yeah.
And I said, "Do you still invest in crypto?" And he's like, "Yeah, a little bit here and there." And I said, "Well, I'm curious, do you happen to own
Yeah.
Ripple's crypto,
Yeah.
XRP?" And he goes, "Oh, I did buy a little bit of that. I don't know a lot about the company. I don't know a lot about it, but I've
Yeah.
heard about it." And what that told me is that there's a lot of people out there who maybe started in Bitcoin, and that's still the vast majority of their knowledge base when it comes to digital assets. But I
100%.
do feel, and this has happened to me twice now. I told you about a baseball coach who I coach with, who was a big XRP follower, Ripple follower, and now this individual. It just, to me, is a sign that the industry is growing and expanding from its original roots, right? And its original, Bitcoin only, Bitcoin maximalist sort of approach.
Yeah.
That those are just two kind of anecdotal stories. They don't mean anything necessarily, other than it's just it, it's a company and a token that more people are aware of today, I feel, than they were 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. You can almost strike up conversations anywhere you're in public, and this got to be, I don't know if it's 50% chance, probably 25% chance that somebody's going to at least have something to say about crypto, whether they think it's a scam or whether they
Yeah.
actually have owned it. It's not like people have never heard of it. People have heard of it, but they don't know anything about it. It's definitely early, but it's this awkward kind of like adolescent stage of sorts. So
Yeah, well, crypto, I agree. I would say it's even higher I think when
Yeah.
you start talking about Ripple and you start talking
Sure.
about XRP, I think that, like I said, the percentage of people when I say crypto that have ever heard of XRP
Oh,
3 or
it's
4 years ago, I would have said it's less than 5%, less than
mhm.
10%.
Yeah.
Today, like I said, these are just two anecdotes. They don't mean anything. We're not offering a
Mhm.
prediction. It's just interesting to me that,
Yeah.
two conversations I've had with people totally outside of financial services, outside of
Mhm.
crypto, who
Sure.
are just enthusiasts, both are familiar to some extent,
Mhm.
with the, not so much the case and the details, but the company,
Yep.
behind XRP.
Yep. Well, I'm sure that will happen more and more, and then it'll be like we won't want to talk about it anymore. So, moving on here. This next one, again, there's not tons to say here beyond FA has directed Fannie and Freddie to include crypto assets in mortgage assessments. I guess as obviously your net worth.
With
Um,
the FHFA, like
uh,
the entity behind
that's the governing agency that I think spells out the rules for Fannie and Freddie. I think
like
it's
Fair Housing Finance Administration, I think,
yes,
is the entity you're talking about. So they kind of are providing oversight and guidelines to the big
yeah,
mortgage, non-bank mortgage companies, Fannie and Freddie, who buy most of the conventional mortgages from the banks
exactly,
and
yeah.
mortgage companies.
And when I saw this, I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then it got me thinking years ago when we got the mortgage on our house, you had to fill out this financial thing like, oh, this is, what the assets I have. And had crypto at the time, or still, and still do, obviously. But like at the time, I had crypto and I put it on it, and then it started raising alarm bells in the sense that they weren't good. So I took it off, voluntarily took it off. I'm like, that's not an asset I have. And then they were fine. Like they didn't have any more questions, and we just moved
Yeah,
on. So it'd be cool to kind of, because it's an asset that it's rather liquid in most cases, and if you needed to sell some of it for down payment, you could, but they're going to question where that money came from. So
yeah.
it's cool to kind of see that being able to be used as a contributing asset to a mortgage application. So,
Well, there was a case in Australia that made the news in the last couple of weeks where crypto holdings were going to be part of divorce proceedings, right? As
mhm.
far as like if one party owned a bunch of crypto. So you're seeing,
Yep.
excuse me, courts now starting to recognize and in regulatory agencies when it comes to assets and value of someone's wealth
Mhm.
and portfolio. I mean, we've come so far in 2 or 3 years, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think in 3 or 4 years, 2 or 3 years, maybe even, we'll look back and say, "You kidding me? They never included crypto like in 2022 or 2023 in people's like mortgage applications. That's crazy." I
Yeah,
think that,
exactly.
but yeah, we have come a long way in that respect.
Yep. Well, moving on to our last topic here. This just still blows my mind what happened. So Circle was doing the IPO roadshow. They recently did their IPO back in early June. I think it was priced at like 20, $30. It launched that first day, it closed at $82. It no joke ran up to $250 a share or 260 and has kind of settled back down at 185. A market cap as it stands today of $41 billion. The PE ratio is 243. Okay. Like, holy crap.
Yeah.
At one point, when it was at its peak of $263, that was on June the 23rd, the market cap of Circle was bigger than the market cap of the stablecoin. That is their sole business line. They only get interest. Like there's no other revenue stream. So and over 50% of the revenue that Circle generates goes to Coinbase. When the Fed decides to lower rates, likely going to happen. The margins in this business get squeezed. Like
Yeah.
who's buying this? I don't understand it. It's maybe just a bet on the crypto market just generally, but wow, I got this one wrong, to say the least. So.
Well, there's obviously a lot more interest in crypto from traditional finance players. The when you look at Coinbase and you look at Circle and you look at these
Mhm.
other publicly traded companies, which some people feel could be proxies
Mhm.
to the space, there's alongside. the bull, and there's the short side, right?
Yep.
And the bear. And so what you see in some of these headlines, some of these numbers, and performance with some of these stocks, to me, is there's a lot of trading happening behind the scenes. There's a lot of institutional money.
Mm.
There's a big showdown that's not in our headlines, but I think it's one that you may have a reaction to, with Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy. There's now a bear on the other side of it, a noted short seller, Jim Chanos, or
Mhm.
Chanos, who has not been right in all of his short bets. I mean, but he's willing to go out there in the public domain, get on
Right.
TV, and talk about why he's short, and he's
Mm.
got a following, again. And
Mhm.
so it's really interesting because when you look at how Circle and Coinbase and some of these companies, and I'm not lumping them all in with MicroStrategy, but they're now publicly traded companies. There's a
Yep.
lot more money, um, not all smart money, but there's a lot more money,
Mhm.
following this entire space. And I felt like for a long time, crypto was just a get rich quick base. And that I kind of think a lot of people
Mhm.
like that. You made that comment earlier when you asked them about crypto. People are like, "Oh, I was in it once, and then I lost everything," and they kind of wrote it off. And I don't feel like that's the case as much anymore. I think a lot more people,
Right.
Wall Streeters, institutions, are in it, and they are, looking to make money on a daily basis, market up, market down. And
Yep.
it's gonna be fascinating to see what happens here with Circle and MicroStrategy and Coinbase in
Mhm.
particular as three publicly traded companies.
Yeah, just, for the shareholders of, Circle prior to the IPO, to think that they were, at least at some level, entertaining Ripple's offer to buy them for $5 to $7 billion. They obviously turned it down. Um, and then, like, now it turned into 40. Like, good on you. Like,
Hmm.
that was a good gamble. I can't imagine that they thought that the market would run like it did. But if they did, then they priced the IPO incredibly wrong. Either way, but
Yeah.
it's, well, over time. I imagine this one comes down to earth a little bit because it seems a little bit in the stratosphere right now. So
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of hype around it.
awesome. Well, I think that will wrap us up. So thanks for joining us on this episode of the Weekly Crypto Check-In. To stay updated on future episodes, you can find us in any podcast player by searching Tita Crypto Capital or the Weekly Crypto Check-In. Take care.
The information presented in this podcast is for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, trading, or any other advice. The content provided is general in nature and not tailored to any individual's specific circumstances. Always conduct your own due diligence and consult with a professional financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Cryptocurrency trading involves significant risks, including, but not limited to, the potential for loss of all or a portion of your investment, market volatility, and regulatory uncertainty. The hosts, guests, and producers of this podcast are not responsible for any decisions or actions taken based on the information discussed herein. Cryptocurrency is not legal tender in many jurisdictions and is subject to market risks. Past performance does not guarantee future results. This podcast does not endorse or guarantee any investment outcomes or results. Use of this podcast implies your acceptance of this disclaimer.